What if I told you that India, yes, the same India that once struggled under colonial rule, has now officially become the richest nation in terms of gold reserves, hitting a mind-blowing $100 trillion for the first time in history? This isn't just a story about wealth. It's a story about power, strategy, unity, and the unstoppable rise of a partnership that's changing the entire global order: India and Africa together. Welcome back to your number one source for global transformation stories, Echo Africa. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and stay tuned, because what I'm about to share today will completely redefine how you see global economics, gold, and the rise of the global south. For generations, gold has been the heart of India's identity. From wedding jewelry to ancient temples filled with centuries-old treasures, gold isn't just a metal in India, it's a legacy. But today, that legacy has become the foundation of a new global reality. Reports confirm that India's official gold reserves have soared past the $100 trillion mark, a level no nation, not even the U.S. or China, has ever achieved. To understand how India reached this milestone, we must go back to a decade of strategic investment, economic alliances, and visionary partnerships with the African continent. See, while the West was busy talking about sanctions, debts, and dominance, India and Africa were busy building bridges of opportunity. And it all began with one powerful idea: let's build wealth together, not through control, but through cooperation. This simple principle became the backbone of what I call the Golden Revolution. Africa, the land of untapped potential, rich soils, and resilient people, has long been the world's hidden treasure. For centuries, outsiders came to Africa, took what they wanted, and left nothing behind. But that narrative is changing, and India has been one of the biggest forces driving that change. In the early 2020s, India began investing heavily across Africa, from Ghana's gold-rich Ashanti region to Tanzania's mineral belts, to new partnerships in Sudan, Niger, and Ethiopia. Unlike past global powers, India's approach was different. Instead of taking, India partnered. Instead of exploiting, India empowered. India helped African nations develop state-of-the-art gold refineries, trained thousands of local workers, and built fair trade export systems that kept value within the continent. By 2030, African exports of refined gold, much of it traded directly with India, had increased by over 70%, while local economies began to flourish. And behind every deal was one unbreakable bond: trust. That's why this partnership worked. Africa saw in India not a colonizer, but a collaborator, a country that once endured exploitation itself, now choosing to rise together with its allies. Through joint ventures and technology sharing, India gained direct access to some of the world's richest gold reserves. In return, African nations gained infrastructure, jobs, and modern refineries that could compete on the global stage. But it wasn't just about mining. India and Africa built something far smarter: a new trade model that bypassed traditional financial control. For years, gold trade was dominated by Western banks and the US dollar. Every transaction had to go through the same system, giving certain nations near total control over global wealth movement. India and Africa decided to rewrite that rulebook. They launched bilateral trade settlements that allowed gold and other commodities to be exchanged directly in local currencies: the Indian rupee, Ghanaian cedi, Nigerian naira, Kenyan shilling, all supported by blockchain-backed systems for transparency. This move sent shockwaves through the global financial order, because suddenly, gold was no longer just a global commodity controlled by a few. It became a tool of freedom. Africa could now sell gold to India, receive fair value, and reinvest in its own people, while India could secure steady gold inflows without Western interference. This was a masterstroke: economic independence built on cooperation, not competition. By 2035, India's new financial ecosystem was firing on all cylinders. The Reserve Bank of India announced a historic policy, integrating gold-backed digital reserves into its national economy. The idea was simple but revolutionary: let our reserves reflect not just paper money, but real, tangible gold wealth. With this move, India became the first country to anchor its national digital currency to gold in partnership with multiple African suppliers. Global investors took notice, fast. Suddenly, India's gold-backed bonds became more valuable than Treasury securities. Nations around the world began converting their reserves into Indian instruments. And here's where it gets even more interesting. A huge chunk of that gold came directly from Africa, under ethical trade agreements that ensured revenue sharing and sustainable mining. The numbers started skyrocketing. In just 5 years, India's reserves doubled from $50 trillion to $100 trillion, the largest accumulation of wealth in modern history. The world couldn't believe it. News agencies from London to Washington started running headlines like, "India's gold miracle stuns global markets. Africa-India alliance shakes dollar dominance." It was official. India had become the world's new financial superpower, and Africa was right there beside it. You could almost hear the panic in Western capitals. Financial analysts scrambled to understand how this had happened so fast. For decades, the U.S. and Europe had controlled gold prices through centralized markets like London and New York. But now, those same markets were being outpriced by India's decentralized gold network. China, seeing India's rapid ascent, joined hands to expand trade corridors linking African ports to Indian coasts. The once competitive dynamic turned into strategic cooperation. Meanwhile, African leaders celebrated their role in this transformation. In Ghana, the president called it the golden decade of African self-reliance. In Tanzania, Parliament passed new legislation strengthening gold trade security with India. And across the continent, the message was the same. Our partnership with India has made us stronger. The U.S. dollar began to weaken against a new trade benchmark known as the Indo-African Gold Index, IAGI, a value metric for gold-based transactions independent of Western approval. This wasn't just an economic story, it was a civilization shift. Trust doesn't appear overnight, it's earned through action. When India launched its Gold for Growth initiative in 2025, skeptics said it would fail. But by consistently honoring fair trade terms, ensuring transparency, and avoiding exploitation, India built a new reputation, that of a partner nation, not a predator. African nations responded with open arms. Leaders from Kenya, Uganda, Mali, and South Africa signed on to long-term agreements with India, not only for gold but for infrastructure, education, and energy cooperation. New institutions like the Indo-African Gold Exchange, IAG, were established, allowing African miners to sell directly to Indian buyers without middlemen. This ecosystem created millions of jobs, not just in mining, but in refining, transport, and logistics. And guess who benefited most? The Indo-African success story is proof that the global South can lead with integrity, wisdom, and innovation. Gold may be the symbol here, but the real treasure is trust. India trusted Africa's potential. Africa trusted India's sincerity. And that trust built a $100 trillion foundation no empire could ever replicate. This isn't the end, it's the beginning. Because once you understand that power doesn't need to be taken, it can be built. UVE already changed the rules of the game. As I wrap up this report, let's take a step back and see what this really means. India, once a nation defined by colonial extraction, is now the richest gold holder on Earth. Africa, once seen as a source of raw materials, is now the world's co-architect of economic freedom. Together, they've shown us that unity, strategy, and honesty can achieve what centuries of competition could not. So when you hear that India's gold reserves have hit $100 trillion, don't just think about wealth. Think about wisdom. Think about cooperation. Think about the rise of a new world order led by nations that once refused to be controlled. Because this, my friends, is more than economics. This is history, written in gold. I'm your host from Eazicho, Africa, bringing you the stories that matter, stories that connect continents, challenge systems, and celebrate the power of collaboration. If you found this inspiring, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because here at Eazicho Africa, we don't just report the news, we echo the change. Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay informed, stay inspired, and stay unstoppable. Families in Mali, Tanzania, and Ghana began to see real improvements. Schools, hospitals, roads, funded by fair gold profits. It wasn't charity. It was mutual growth. By the time India's reserves officially crossed the $100 trillion mark, the narrative had completely shifted. The so-called developing world had developed its own system, and it was working better than anyone expected. India and Africa together became symbols of what collaboration could achieve when driven by respect, not dominance. Global economists started calling it the Golden South movement. For the first time in modern history, wealth wasn't flowing from south to north. It was flowing across the South, building shared strength and prosperity. And through it all, one message remained clear. The future belongs to those who cooperate, not those who control. Here on Eazicho Africa, we've been tracking this journey since day one, and this milestone proves it. The partnership between India and Africa isn't just changing economies, it's reshaping destiny. When India crossed the $100 trillion gold mark, it didn't just make history. It rewrote the future of global finance. The old world order was built on a handful of powers controlling money, markets, and resources. But now, with India's gold-backed economy standing tall and Africa holding the key to its supply chain, that balance shifted permanently. The International Monetary Fund and World Bank, which once dictated the direction of developing economies, suddenly found themselves studying a new model, one built on mutual respect and self-determination. India's Reserve Bank introduced the Global Gold Stability Index, GGSI, an international benchmark backed by 26 African partner nations. This index became the new standard for valuing gold-based transactions, replacing the dominance of the London bullion market. And here's what really shocked the world. For the first time in modern history, a non-Western alliance, driven by India and Africa, began setting the tone for global trade policy. Let's be clear, this wasn't a one-sided success story. Africa didn't just help India reach $100 trillion. Africa rose right alongside it. African economies that partnered with India began seeing record GDP growth. Ghana, for example, doubled its national gold production and saw unemployment drop by 40%. In Tanzania, India helped establish one of the world's largest gold refining complexes, creating an entire ecosystem of engineers, geologists, and logistics experts. And in Mali, Indian-backed technology helped local miners increase recovery rates while protecting the environment. But perhaps the biggest win for Africa was ownership. Under the Indo-African Gold Pact, African nations retained 60% of their mining profits domestically. That meant for every shipment of gold that left African ports, most of the value stayed on the continent, funding roads, hospitals, schools, and clean energy projects. This wasn't charity, it was empowerment. By 2035, Africa's combined gold exports to India exceeded $8 trillion annually, and African gold-backed bonds started gaining traction in Asian markets. For the first time in history, African currencies were gaining value, not because of foreign aid, but because of real gold-backed trade. That's what makes this story so powerful. It's not just about India's success. It's about Africa reclaiming its place in the global economy. Meanwhile, in the West, the reaction was swift and divided. Some saw opportunity, others saw threat. Washington and Brussels initially dismissed India's milestone as symbolic. But as more nations started trading gold and commodities in the new Indo-African system, the pressure mounted. By 2036, more than 40 countries, including some in Latin America and Southeast Asia, had joined the Indo-African Gold Network. Global gold prices, once set in London, now began reacting to market activity in Mumbai, Accra, and Johannesburg. Western financial analysts started calling it the shift to the south. Traditional powerhouses had two choices: adapt or fade. And slowly, one by one, they began to adapt. European nations started negotiating with India to participate in the new gold exchange. American corporations began sourcing gold through Indian-Africa trade corridors. In other words, the system they once controlled had outgrown them. But here's where India truly pulled ahead: technology. India didn't just store gold, it digitized it. The Reserve Bank of India launched a blockchain-based platform called Swarna Chain, which allowed transparent gold trading between India and African nations. Every transaction could be verified in real time, eliminating corruption and manipulation. African nations quickly adopted the same system. Nigeria integrated Swarna Chain into its financial structure to track gold exports. Kenya and Ghana used it to build smart contracts that automatically distributed mining profits to local communities. This was revolutionary because it meant every gram of gold had a digital fingerprint. No more lost data. No more middlemen. No more foreign interference. For ordinary people, this digital transformation meant something incredible. A farmer in Kenya, a miner in Mali, or an entrepreneur in Delhi could all participate directly in the global gold economy, using only their smartphones. The digital gold era had begun, and it belonged to the global south. By the late 2030s, the success of the Indo-African Gold Alliance had inspired other regions to follow suit. South America launched its own Silver Corridor program, linking Argentina, Brazil, and Chile with India's trading system. The Middle East began discussing a petro-gold exchange built on similar terms of fairness and sustainability. But the Indo-African partnership remained unmatched because it was more than economics. It was about shared history and mutual respect. Both India and Africa had once been colonized, exploited, and divided. Now, they stood united not in protest, but in power. And that unity sent a message to every corner of the planet. The age of dependency is over. The age of equality has begun. In classrooms from Lagos to New Delhi, students began studying the Indo-African model as the blueprint for future global partnerships. When India's gold reserves hit $100 trillion, leaders around the world weighed in. The president of Ghana said, "This is proof that Africa's resources can finally serve African and Asian prosperity, not foreign profit." India's prime minister declared, "Our partnership with Africa is our greatest strength. Together we have forged the future of global finance." Economist Asha Varma wrote in her report for the Global Development Forum, "The Indo-African gold system has become the single most disruptive innovation in modern economics, replacing competition with collaboration." Even Western financial experts admitted the magnitude. A headline from Bloomberg read, "India and Africa, the new power centers of gold." And here at Iazicho Africa, we've been saying it for years. When Africa rises, the world changes. When Africa partners with visionaries, the future transforms. So what's the lesson behind all this? It's simple. Partnership beats domination. When nations cooperate, they all rise. When they share knowledge, trade fairly, and respect sovereignty, miracles happen. The Indo-African success story is proof that the global south can lead with integrity, wisdom, and innovation. Gold may be the symbol here, but the real treasure is trust. India trusted Africa's potential. Africa trusted India's sincerity. And that trust built a $100 trillion foundation no empire could ever replicate. This isn't the end, it's the beginning. Because once you understand that power doesn't need to be taken, it can be built. You've already changed the rules of the game. As I wrap up this report, let's take a step back and see what this really means. India, once a nation defined by colonial extraction, is now the richest gold holder on Earth. Africa, once seen as a source of raw materials, is now the world's co-architect of economic freedom. Together, they've shown us that unity, strategy, and honesty can achieve what centuries of competition could not. So when you hear that India's gold reserves have hit $100 trillion, don't just think about wealth. Think about wisdom. Think about cooperation. Think about the rise of a new world order led by nations that once refused to be controlled. Because this, my friends, is more than economics. This is history, written in gold. I'm your host from Iazicho Africa, bringing you the stories that matter, stories that connect continents, challenge systems, and celebrate the power of collaboration. If you found this inspiring, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because here at Iazicho Africa, we don't just report the news, we echo the change. Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay informed, stay inspired, and stay unstoppable.